So I'm John Freeman, and it's a pleasure to introduce our guest. Forgive me for reading, but today, several days after Father's Day, it's fitting that Gary W. Moore comes to speak to us about his best-selling book, Playing with the Enemy, a baseball prodigy, a world at war, and a field of broken dreams. His book tells the tale of his father's amazing life journey, both as a top Brooklyn Dodgers prospect, whose career was shortened by military service during World War II, and his military career, which included playing ball for the U.S. Navy and in a top-secret mission guarding German U-boat prisoners of war in rural Louisiana. And oh yes, here is a tease. He taught those German POWs the glories of baseball. This story of his father's life earned him the Book of the Year award from the Military Writers Society of America. So please join me in welcoming Gary W. Moore.
All right, thank you. I am so excited to be here. You know, I have to tell you though, driving into San Diego today, which I think is just, one of the world's most beautiful cities, I get this sick feeling in my stomach when I saw the sign, "Welcome to San Diego," because being from Chicago, being a Cubs fan, I remember the 1984 playoffs, where the Cubs won the first two games at Wrigley, and we came here, and you guys were so rude. It was just hurt my feelings. It still sticks with me today, so but I'm trying to get over it. I'm excited to be here for a lot of reasons. First, I'm excited because I get to see George. I have not known George very long, but I feel like I've known him a lifetime. And I want to tell you a little bit about my first experience with George. I'm a syndicated columnist, and I actually wrote a column 2 weeks ago about George, and you can find it online. And it was about meeting George for the first time. George, I got a call one day, and a man who I'd never heard of, George Mitrovich, said, "Hey, I'm in charge of the Red Sox Writers Series. Would you come out and speak?" And I says, "Yeah." I said, "I'd love to do it." And he says, "Well, first of all, I should tell you, I'm calling you because, I listened to your daughter's sermons online." So one more time that I kind of piggyback on my kids' kind of popularity and expertise to get in someplace. But George said, I talked to her. She told me about your books. I've looked up your book. Would you come join us? So I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." I called my daughter and I told her what had happened, and she said, "Well, that's great." And I said, "What's George like?" She says, "I haven't met him yet." But she said, "People have told me the most phenomenal stories about George." She said, "So I'm really anxious for you to meet him and kind of tell me about it." And I said, "Well, what are some of the phenomenal stories?" And she said, "Well, a friend of mine who actually works at the Nazarene College that George had graduated from tells a story about George Mitrovich, the man who knows everybody. There isn't anybody that George Mitrovich doesn't know. And he'll tell you so. He does know everybody. But the difference is he does know everybody. So he has the right to say that. Well, he tells my daughter, says, "Yeah, one time," says, "I was with George, and we were kind of traveling around, and he knew everybody, and he's shaking hands. And I made a statement to him, said, 'George, you know just about everybody.' And he looked at him and says, 'My name is George Mitrovich. I know everybody. There isn't anybody I don't know.'" And he says, "Well, George, that's a little arrogant." Says, I know there's some people you don't know. Some people, right?" And he says, "My name is George Mitrovich. I know everybody. There isn't anybody I don't know." And he says, "Well, you don't know Paul McCartney, for example." He says, "Paul, I know Paul. Absolutely. In fact, Paul's giving a concert next week. He's up in Los Angeles. Let's go up and I'll introduce you." So the guy says, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's go meet Paul McCartney." So they're sitting close to the front row. Paul McCartney comes out with his band Wings, and he's playing. All of a sudden, the music stops, and he looks down. He says, George Mitrovich, come see me backstage, and we'll catch up on old times." So George kind of nods. The guy says, "My name is George Mitrovich. I know everybody. There isn't anybody I don't know." So they go backstage. They meet Paul McCartney. Everything's wonderful. And he says, "We're driving home." And I said, "George, boy, you got lucky on this one." He said, "What do you mean lucky?" "My name's George Mitrovich. I know everybody. There's anybody I don't know." He says, "Well, come on. I mean, you don't know." This is when President Clinton was president. He says, "You don't know President Clinton." He says, "Bill? I know Bill." He says, "In fact, Bill's giving a speech at the Civic Center next week." He says, "Come with me. I'll introduce you to Bill." So the guy's thinking, well, now I've got him. He doesn't know the President of the United States. They get to the Civic Center. They're sitting close to the front row. The president comes out, and he's in the middle of a very important policy speech. He stops. He says, George Mitrovich, come see me after the speech, and I'll take you for a ride in Air Force One. So the guy is just amazed. He can't believe it. He says, gosh, this guy does know everybody, but it's got to be just luck. And so they go for a ride in Air Force One. They land. Bill Clinton lets them off, and he looks at George. He says, George says, you know a lot of people. And he says, no, my name's George Mitrovich. No, everybody, there's nobody I know. He says, all right, one last chance. He says, you don't know the Pope in Rome. He said, the Pope? I know the Pope. I absolutely know the Pope. And he says, well, I'll bet you $1,000 you don't know the Pope. And George said, I'm not a betting man, but I'll take you up on this. They go straight to the airport. They fly to Rome. They get to Rome. They catch a cab. They go to St. Peter's Cathedral, and there's thousands of people. You see them all out in the courtyard, and they're all looking up at the balcony, and they're waiting for the Pope to just come out and bless them. So they're standing there, and George's friend looks at him and says, George, look, this has been a great run. I want to let you off the hook now. You don't know the Pope. He says, you wait right here. I'm going to go in, say hello to my friend the Pope, and I'll be right back. So George goes in. The guy's there, people speaking from different languages all over the world. All of a sudden, the doors open up. Out walks the Pope with his arm around George Mitrovich. The guy passes out. He's laying there. They didn't know what to do. Paramedics come. They're getting ready to take away. George runs out. And he says, I told you. I knew everybody. Don't be. He says, George, that's not it. He says, you do know everybody. There's nobody you know. He says, what gets to me? He says, when you walked out there up on the balcony of the Pope, the guy next to me said, hey, who's that guy up there with George Mitrovich? I have heard that joke for 30 years, and I didn't know there really was a George Mitrovich. So I am honored to be here. And now if somebody ever says to George, well, do you know Gary Moore? He'll say, Gary Moore? I know Gary Moore. I'm George Mitrovich. I know everybody. You know, being from Chicago, I was telling George a story when we were in Boston. He says, you have to tell this story to the Boston crowd. And some people have come in with Cubs jerseys, God bless you, you know, and some other people from Chicago. And I want to tell you a really true Harry Carey story, an experience that I had. You know, we all know Harry. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what city you live in. I don't care what team you follow. Everybody loves Harry. He's just a lovable, funny guy. And in Chicago, we miss him dearly. But he still lives on. I mean, there's not a moment when the Cubs are playing that somebody doesn't talk about Harry or tell a Harry story. Let me tell you my Harry Carey story. I was used to be CEO of a medical technology company. We manufactured a product that was a needle-free injection system for people with diabetes. It was called a Freedom Jet. Well, we sold it for a few years and things were going well, and we developed a child version of this that would inject smaller doses of insulin. You know, and it would measure it perfectly. So I don't want to get into the details of it, but with injecting insulin to the child, it's easy to do damage to a baby, especially because you're dealing in sometimes quarters of units and half units of insulin and getting the measurements right. Well, we had a mechanical measuring device, and then it would inject the insulin without a needle. It would actually inject it in a microjet stream that was so small, it would go into the skin and immediately kind of spread out into a mist. Well, somebody said to me, we were working with an advertising firm, and he said, you know Ron Santo? I said, no. I said, I've been an admirer for years as a fan of the Cubs. And he says, well, Ron works for the JDF, Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. He said, you ought to talk to him, see if he'd want to be a spokesman. So I talked to Ron, and we made a deal, and Ron got involved, and our sales started going up, and Ron got very excited about the product and the difference it was making, so we started a foundation together called the Ron Santo Freedom Jet Foundation. Started going well, and all of a sudden Ron and his business manager came to me one day and he says, we want to buy into the company. So Ron became a shareholder, became my business partner. And we just had a ball, you know, for quite a few years. Working with Ron was just you know, not as much fun as working with George would be, but very, very close. Because Ron knew everybody in baseball. Everybody knew Ron, and he had all kinds of stories. Well, one day the JDF came to us and said, you know, hey, you guys are making a lot of money selling juvenile diabetics. He said, you should be doing something for us. And we said, well, what do you want? And they said, we want you to have a black tie event in the Wrigley building, $500 a plate. We want to raise $100,000 for juvenile diabetes. And we said, we'll do it. We don't know if we can raise $100,000, but we'll certainly do it. And they said, well, if you have Harry Carey as a speaker, says, we think you can do it. And Ron got very nervous because he works with Harry every day. Well, no, you don't want Harry. You don't want to give him a microphone. You don't want to give him a microphone after 5 o'clock especially. And it's just not something they want to do. And they insisted. So Ron told me, he kind of winked at me. He said, don't worry. He says, Harry will say no. Harry just doesn't do these kind of things. So a few days later, Ron, I was really feeling, Ron says, come up to the booth. He says, after the first inning, he says, we'll talk for a minute. We'll ask Harry. Harry will say no. So we get up there. Ron says to Harry, he wants you to speak for the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation to help raise money. Before he could get the next words out, Harry goes, "Oh, Ron, yeah. Oh, that's important to me. I want to do it. Yeah, you can count on me." And I'm thinking, what's Ron talking about? This guy wants to do it. Ron goes, "Wait, Harry," he says, "you know anything about it?" "Oh, I know all about it. And this is something we've got to do. We got to take care of this. We got to raise money to stop this problem." And so Ron is just flabbergasted. He doesn't even know what to say. And I says, "I guess Harry says yes." So anyway, Ron is afraid. The event's in October. This is about May. And Ron is just a nervous wreck. I don't know what Harry's going to say. He won't let me write him a speech. I saw Harry before a game in August, and Ron was there, and he says, "Ron, Harry, let me write you a speech." "Oh, Ron, no, I already know what I'm going to say. This is important." So the day arrives, and things kind of happen the way Ron had predicted. We're black tie, we're at Wrigley. It's a 7 o'clock event. At 7 o'clock, there's no Harry Carey. It's 7:15, there's no Harry Carey. Cocktails end at 7:30, there's no Harry Carey. Well, all of a sudden at 7:31, doors bust open. We're all in black tie. Here comes this guy, striped Bermuda shorts, a polka dot shirt, and a plaid sports coat. That's Harry. "Hey, everybody!" He makes his Harry Carey entrance. Everybody's just delighted because you've been disappointed had he come in the tux. Well, the closer he gets, you find out Harry is just absolutely bombed. I mean, he's not even sure where he is. So we bring him up, and Ron is now sweating bullets. I'm telling Ron, I said, "This is going to be great. Don't worry about it." "Oh, no," he said, "this is important to me." And he said, "Harry," he says, "can I give you just a few words?" Say, "Oh, Ron, stop it. I know what I'm going to say. This is important." So people from the JDF get up and they say a few words about diabetes. They introduce me. I get up and I say a few words about our company. I introduce Ron. Ron gets up and he says a few words, and he's scared to death. And finally he introduces Harry. Harry gets up the microphone and he says, "Ron was really worried about what I'm going to say, but I'm going to tell you, we got to do something about these juvenile delinquents. They're spray painting pictures all over." And he takes off on a rant about juvenile delinquency. Everybody in the crowd is starting to giggle, starting to laugh. They're getting their money's worth. Nobody's upset. And he just keeps going. Well, Ron, again, he is just mortified. And so it gets worse because Ron starts tugging on the sleeve of the plaid sports coat. And finally Harry stops and goes, "Ron, what is it?" And Ron goes, "Harry, it's diabetes. Harry goes, Who died? Ron just told me somebody died. We need a doctor in the house." Well, finally, Ron just claps his face into his hands, stayed there till Harry finished. Harry finished, proverbial drops the microphone, walks out, and he never ever knew that he was at a diabetes function, not a juvenile delinquent function. So, and those of you who know anything about Harry Carey know this is absolutely true. That's Harry. I'm here to tell you a story today, a different story though. A story that's a little bit closer to my heart. Tell you a story about my father. My father grew up in a little town in southern Illinois called Cesar. Now, I would venture guess here nobody's ever heard of Cesar, Illinois. Cesar is a little town right now that's about 716 people. It's in kind of the deserted coal mining part of Illinois. For those of you who don't know, the southern third of Illinois and the northern part of Kentucky is considered the Saudi Arabia of coal. I mean, it is on the largest coal shelf known in the world. But the problem is, first of all, coal's not the best thing we should be burning right now. And this coal is toxic because it has the highest sulfur content of any coal that has ever been mined. And so this area thrived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Booming communities. Cesar, Illinois was one of them. Cesar, Illinois, at the time, got up to be almost 4,000 people. It was a beautiful little town. It was built by the British because the British owned the coal mines. And they even had their own little opera house. And it was just great, and everything was wonderful. And in 1926, people were dropping dead in Chicago just, on a regular basis, young, old, whatever. The only kind of correlation was they were all suffering from some type of respiratory illness. And they brought in a researcher, and they found after a while that yellow haze that was floating over Chicago wasn't just from the coal, but it was from the sulfur in the coal, and it was causing sulfur poisoning and killing the masses. So all of a sudden one day the state of Illinois said, "Hey, look, we're not going to make it illegal to burn coal from southern Illinois in Illinois anywhere." and this whole area collapsed. This town, Cesar, Illinois, where my father lived with his brother and 5 sisters and his mom and dad. Father was a coal miner. All of a sudden, he was out of work. Well, my grandparents didn't have much of an education. My grandfather had been to the first grade and very proud of it. He didn't finish, but he'd been to the first grade, which was more formal education than any Moore had ever had in history. My grandmother had never been to school, but she said that she was, she had all the education she needed that a woman needed to know. I mean, she knew how to cook, she knew how to have babies, and that was just the way life was in Southern Illinois, which is really part of Appalachian America at the time. They didn't have anything. There was no electricity at the time. Most places didn't have running water. They all had their own well, which was heavily kind of inundated with sulfur. And back at that time, because we didn't have electricity, you couldn't have radio, the only entertainment they had in town was their baseball team. They had the Cesar Egyptians. And the sun rose and set on the Cesar Egyptians. They were incredible. At the time in the Midwest, every town had their own team, had their own park, and that was really the basic entertainment. This little town at the time had about 700 people. When my dad was playing ball, they would have 300 people show up to a game, which is really quite phenomenal when you think about it, the way the sport they had. They're called the Cesar Egyptians. They're called the Egyptians for an unusual reason. When I wrote the book, in fact, when you read the book, and hopefully you will, and I'm not going to let you out of the room until you do, so I'll just sit and wait. I say that the team is named the Egyptians for reasons that are not, no longer known. Well, after the book came out, I got a call from a professor who was in his 90s, who had retired from Southern Illinois University. He said, "You the young man that wrote Playing with the Enemy?" And I immediately loved him. Anybody will call me a young man, I immediately love. And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You said you don't know why they are called the Egyptians." And I said, "I don't." He said, "Well, all of Southern Illinois is called Little Egypt." And I said, "Well, I know that, but I don't know why." He said, "Well, let me tell you why." He said, when people started settling here in the mid-1800s, the terrain really isn't equipped for farming. It's very rocky. It doesn't have the rich, fertile soil that most of Illinois has to the north. The glaciers didn't get down that far, so it didn't level things out. And he said people were moving here and they started farming, and they had 7 years of perfect rain, perfect weather, and everything was just incredible. He said 7 years of bumper crops, then 7 years of drought. And he said everybody moved back out of Southern Illinois. And he says, "You get it?" And I said, "Do I get what?" He said, 7 years of bumper crops, 7 years of drought. He said, Joseph, the Pharaoh. He said, the Bible. He said, they started calling each other Egyptians. And he said, it just stuck. It's part of Southern Illinois. It's now called Little Egypt. Well, the team was called the Southern Illinois Egyptians. Well, the Egyptians were really a kind of a good little, baseball team. The average age was 26 years old in 1941. And there were kids who were coming up and wanting to make the major leagues. Those who didn't make it were still coming down but didn't want to give it up. Except for one. There was one ball player that was really kind of skewing the average. He had just turned 15 years old. He's a catcher. His name was Gene Moore, my father. Well, it's unusual to have a kid who was just turned 15 be playing on a team of 26-year-olds. Even more unusual, he was captain of the team. Well, I ended up talking to the pitcher of the team when I was writing this book, and I said, "Well, how was it he would not be captain of the team?" And he said, "Well, he was the one who would have to carry the bats and balls and load them in the truck and go into play, so on and so forth." He said, he said, back in that day, he says, we weren't looking for leadership. We were looking for the best player. Best player is in charge. He said, your dad, 15 years old, was the best player on the team. Well, the year before, when he was 14 years old, he was playing in what they call the Coal Valley Championship in Litchfield, Illinois. And at 14 years old, he hit a home run in the ninth inning to win the game. And a writer from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, although at the time I think it was just the St. Louis Post, wrote a column, and it was called "The Country Boy That Hit the Ball a Country Mile." And it was all about the fact he was at this game and walked off this home run, and he says it was 420 feet on a fly. He said he was only 14 years old. Well, somebody cut out this piece of paper, and I don't know where all they sent it, but they sent it to Ebbets Field. I know it landed there in Brooklyn, and they sent their chief scout, a guy named Lou Boudreau, who was in charge of the Midwest, the next season to see this boy play. Well, Lou showed up at the game. Did I say Lou? Frank Boudreau. I got my Boudreaux mixed up. Frank showed up at the game, watched him, but realized this kid, he said he came back, the scouting report says he came back to catch a foul ball, flipped off his mask. He said, I realized he wasn't even shaving yet. He said, so I went back to Benton, Illinois, and this is something the kids, when I talked to a lot of schools, and I said, and he contacted the Dodgers. How do you think he did it? And they said, well, he turned on his phone. I said, no, I didn't have cell phones back then. We went to a phone booth. No, I didn't do that. What did they do? Well, I don't know. He went to Benton, Illinois, and sent a telegram to Ebbets Field, and it says, he's as good as advertised. He's only 15. I'm waiting instructions. About 20 minutes later, a telegram comes back, and it says, sign him, but tell his parents. So they signed him to a professional contract. He ended up going to St. Louis, and back then, keep in mind this is 1941, this is before World War II, the minor league system as we know it really didn't formally develop until after World War II. Back then there was a conglomeration of town teams and industrial teams, and the major league teams contributed some money to help keep the teams going and pay the guys, and they would kind of use that as their minor league system. So my father was sent to the St. Louis granary team, and that's where he played. He was 15 years old, was Rookie of the Year that year, came back in December. He got a letter early December from the Dodgers saying, hey, we're proud of you. You had a great season. Your stats are good. We're inviting you to the major league camp. And they were very, very clear. This is, you're probably not going to stay, but we want to take a good look at you. I mean, that's before the internet, before video. If they wanted to see him, they had to either go see him or bring him there. So he was headed to Dodgers camp. Well, this book has been, and I say this with a lot of humility because it's not my writing. The book is on the power of my father's story. Has been wildly successful. It's now in its 27th printing, and it's in its 27th printing largely because there are 4 points where, like that, my father's life changes forever. And every person here is at least of an age where you can think of at least 4 times in your life, like that, something happened you weren't expecting, but it did, and it changed the course of your life. The first one was on December 7th, 1941. My father was actually sitting in a movie theater, actually the Opera House, and they were showing Citizen Kane on a Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden the movie stopped. The guy who owned the theater walked out, and he said, everybody go home, the Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, my father didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, what he told me, he said, I'm not even sure why the Japs were mad at us, but he says, obviously something big had happened. They left the theater. My father's 15 years old. He's too young to join the service, so he figures, well, I'm still going to play baseball because this isn't going to last very long. Well, those of you who know the history of baseball at the time, there was a period of time where they thought the major leagues would not continue. They decided to go ahead and force it, continue to play with some people. Some of the teams, in fact, I think it was, his name was Gray. He played with one arm. And so it was a tough time, but the President of the United States, Roosevelt, thought it was very important that baseball continue. But the minor leagues didn't continue because all the young men were gone. Well, my father got a letter, and this is, if we have any lawyers in the room, you'll understand how funny this kind of is. What we refuse to put in writing today, 50, 60, 70 years ago, we didn't care what we put in writing. The Dodgers sent him a handwritten letter on Dodger stationery that said, on March 19th, you're going to turn 16 years old. You have to be 17 to be in the service, and even then you have to do it with your father's signature. So on March 19th, we want you to go to the Naval Recruiting Station in Carbondale, Illinois with your father. Your father will sign you into the Navy claiming that you're 17, and you're going to board a train, and we'll pick you up in Chicago. So I think about my 2 sons. There's a world war raging. He's still 15 years old. He gets a letter saying, have your father take you, lie for you to get you in the service, and we're going to send you overseas. And nobody thought anything about it. Dodgers thought that was perfectly okay. My grandfather thought it was perfectly okay. My dad was excited about it. So he's on a train, on March 19th, heading towards Chicago. He wrote my grandmother a letter, and it said, as the train approached the city of Chicago, it would look like Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz. And that's what it looked like to a small town boy. The next day he wrote a letter and told her that he did not know that Chicago was on the ocean. But he was sleeping in a pier that extended out in Chicago, slept in a big round room, which is Navy Pier, for those who know Navy Pier, at the ballroom at the end. And he couldn't see across that lake, so he just made the assumption it was the Atlantic Ocean. That must be not Michigan, but England over there. Next day, they took him to Great Lakes, where he said they shaved his head, took his clothes, pushed him in a pool. And I said, "Why'd they push you in a pool?" And he says, "Well, this is the Navy, and if you can swim, it's probably an asset." And he said, once they took the people who could swim and put them in one group, the ones who couldn't swim put them in another group. And he said they handed me a uniform, but it wasn't a Navy uniform. It was a uniform that said United States Navy, and it was a baseball team. There he met the other members of the United States Navy touring baseball team. They had what he called not basic training, but spring training, where they spent about 9 weeks playing baseball at Great Lakes. Then they were transferred by train to Norfolk, Virginia, where he said they spent about 9 weeks playing baseball. Then he said they were put on a ship, and they were taken to the Azore Islands, where he spent about 9 weeks playing baseball. And he didn't know why they were there, but Azore Islands were the staging area for Operation Torch, which is the largest naval amphibious landing in the history of warfare. And we landed all of our troops, our tanks, our tents, our hospitals, everything we needed to make war, along with a couple of bags of bats balls and a portable backstop. And there the United States Navy team met the United States Army team. Well, the Navy team was all made up of Dodger hopefuls. The Army team was all made up of Yankee hopefuls. And I went around for 5 years after the book came out telling the story that, they had the Navy said, well, we're always playing for Army guys. It's unfair. So they had like a sign made, and one side it said Yankee Stadium, the other side it said Evans Field, and every other game they'd flip the sign. And that was just a story my father had told me, and I had no proof of that. Well, I was speaking at the World War II Museum in Louisiana, and they gave me a picture. And there was a picture of a catcher, and the catcher is just kind of looking out this way, and on the backstop it said Ebbets Field. And so it looked like my father, but it was either my father or the catcher for the Army. We don't know. But that's how they played, and they spent their time entertaining troops. Well, again, I spent a lot of time talking to high school and college kids, and the first question usually, why would they want to play baseball to entertain troops? And what I always tell them is they didn't understand. You go back to World War II, the two top forms of entertainment, physical entertainment, number one was baseball. Horse racing was number two. And as far as the entertainment that the troops wanted, what the troops wanted was baseball and big band jazz. And so you've got the big bands that are touring, and you have the baseball players and the baseball teams that are touring. Well, if the war starts winding down, they were out there, played for a couple of years, and they're getting ready for the invasion of Europe, although the baseball team didn't know that. But one day the baseball team was told to pack up, you're heading back to Norfolk. They got back to Norfolk, Virginia, and my father said that he knew something was weird because he said nobody cared about baseball anymore. They didn't care they were a baseball team, and they were in Norfolk for 2 weeks, and then they were told, we're going to send you back to Great Lakes so you can actually get real basic training, so you can actually serve the rest of the war on a ship. Well, they were disappointed, but they're packed up, they're ready to go. Well, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, they're woken from sleep. And they look up, and my father said the Shore Patrol was there, which was the Navy version of the MPs. And they're armed, and they said, pack up your gear, you're not coming back, and come with us. My father was captain of the team. He said, well, we're not going with you. He says, we're leaving tomorrow morning to go back to Great Lakes. And they said, no, you're coming with us. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, they took these guys to a Quonset hut next to a railroad station, and they had them long tables lined up, and he said there was a stack of documents. He said about this thick. Exact words were, he said there was a stack of documents could choke a horse. And we used to own horses. I never did figure how many documents that was, how many pieces of paper. But imagine I've seen horses eat, it's a lot. And so they said, sign the last page. And he said, well, we have to read it. And they said, you don't have time to read it, you have to sign it. So I'm not going to sign unless you read it. And then they told him that if they didn't sign the documents, they'd be incarcerated. So they signed the documents. Then they were told the United States Navy had just captured a German U-boat. They didn't tell them what it was the U-505, which is actually at the Museum of Science and History today. With the capture of the U-boat, they captured a German Enigma machine. And it really was the turning point in the war, because not only did they have the machine, but they had the code books. And the Navy knew if the Germans find out we've captured this submarine, they'll change the code, and it's all for nothing. So they dumped oil all over the ocean. They took all the clothes from the sailors and belongings of U-505, threw them out, and left it for the Germans to find, and they did. And so the Germans actually reported and sent letters home to the families who thought that their members were lost at sea. Well, they were actually in Bermuda. The boat was left there. They moved the sailors to Norfolk, and they were sitting in the Quonset hut next to my father that night. And they said, all the able-bodied sailors are off to war. You're here. You're going to guard these German prisoners at an undisclosed location in Louisiana. It was called Camp Ruston. And they said, what these documents you signed says that if you ever tell anybody this story, you'll be sent to a federal penitentiary. If while you're in Camp Ruston, if you try to contact anyone, we're going to incarcerate you for the rest of your life. And once the war is over, if you ever disclose what happened, you go to federal prison for the rest of your life. Well, that's pretty serious stuff. So my grandparents thought that my father was still in North Africa. They didn't know that he came back. And he all spent the rest of the war in Camp Ruston, Louisiana, where they got bored. And they didn't know what to do. Keep in mind, their average age of this team is about 19 years old now. And they're guarding German submariners that are average age about 32, 33. If you know anything about the submarine corps, or they call it Unterseeboot Corps of the German Navy, it was the toughest of the tough. These guys had been through it all, seen it all. And the little ball players from the Navy were no match for these guys. So they're guarding them. About the third night, they get up in the morning, go to find them. They're gone. They're gone. They're frantic. They know that they're going to go to jail because these prisoners got away. They can't tell anybody they've gotten away. They've got to find them. So they're running all over Louisiana trying to catch them. About 2 o'clock in the morning, a police car shows up at the camp, and he said, "Are you guys guarding those Germans?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "They can't close the bar downtown because they won't leave." So they had to go downtown, get the Germans out of the bar, bring them back. My father said there was only one that spoke English. He says, "Why didn't you leave?" He says, "Alligators." So they brought them back to Louisiana, locked them up, and they realized that they needed to do something to keep these guys from trying to escape, to keep them busy. So what they did was they were given two choices. They could pick cotton because the cotton crop was getting ready to be picked and all the men were gone. So you could pick cotton or you could learn to play baseball. Well, the majority, believe it or not, the majority of the Germans chose to pick cotton because they thought playing baseball with the Americans would be, you'd be a traitor. But 17 of the ball players decided to play of the Germans, of the 56, and they spent the rest of the war playing baseball together. Well, they got to a point, they divided the teams up, half the Germans, half the Americans on each team, and they'd play ball. And my father told me, he says, these guys were pretty good. He said there were some of them that played cricket in Europe and were pretty good. They were all soccer players. They were all pretty good athletes. He said they were just kind of learning the skills of baseball. He said they weren't good enough to beat us, but he said they were good enough to have a good time with and play. Well, one day the Germans, and this won't surprise anybody, being very nationalistic, says, "We refuse to play baseball with you." And they said, "Well, what? Well, I thought we were having fun." He says, "We want to play baseball against you." Well, these are a young group of professionals playing these Germans who they don't know how to play baseball. They just learn the basics. And they said, "Well, you can't win." He says, "But we can." He says, these are our new rules. They changed the rules of baseball, and here were the rules. The Americans, when they were up to bat, they only got one strike. And one strike, you're out. Foul ball counts as a strike. You either hit the ball. But there was actually 6 balls before you take a base. So the pitcher is allowed for the pitcher. And the Germans, they had a guy who was a bowler. If you know what a bowler is, that's in the game of cricket. They run towards you and they throw it, and they end up throwing the ball from 40 feet. And it was actually pretty hard to hit, and the guy was pretty good. And they said, "Okay." He said, "But when the Americans can only score 2 runs an inning, and then the inning's over." The Germans, when they're up to bat, they get 4 strikes, 2 balls they get to take a base, and every run counts, or every run that they get counts as 2, and there's an unlimited amount. Well, my dad, this would not be a thing that you would say today, in polite company, but back then my dad says we called it crowd ball. It wasn't baseball, it was crowd ball. They were playing by their rules, and that's what we did. And he said it actually made it a pretty fun game. He said they never could quite beat us, but they came close. Well, war comes to an end. It's all over. These Americans, Germans have become very close, very dear friends. And I think there's a lot of psychological studies about enemies playing games together, and the camaraderie that's created, and the working together and against each other kind of thing. It just creates a relationship that the war is over, and they're getting ready to ship the Germans to Canada. And my dad says, let's play one last game. We'll call it the friendship game because we're finally friends, and it'll be the first international baseball game, so this will be the first World Series. So they decide to do it. Well, the Navy gets hold of this, and they like it, so they start inviting dignitaries from all over. There's a lot of people showed up. In fact, I spoke in Ruston, Louisiana, about 7 years ago, and met a couple. They were actually in their 80s, and it was brother-sister twins, and they were at that game. And they told me things about the game that I didn't know. But they're at the game, and they're playing, and it was a very, very close game. It was just a lot of fun for everybody. But during that game, my father was injured. He broke his ankle. Well, an ankle break isn't a big deal. Really, you kind of set it, it heals, it's fine. But there was a representative of the Dodgers there at that game, and he just absolutely had a fit saying, you can't touch that ankle. He's one of our stars, up-and-coming stars. You can't touch that ankle. We need to immediately ship him to Brooklyn, where the Brooklyn surgeons can look at him. Well, the Navy didn't have authority to do it and says, well, we have doctors here, they're fine. And they said, no, you're not moving. Well, anyway, the argument went on for 6 weeks. My father sat in a cot, and I've actually been in the building. The only building remaining at Camp Ruston is the hospital. And I've actually stood there, and I didn't know exactly where, but I knew where my father laid in this room for 6 weeks. Finally, it went all the way to the War Department. The War Department says, okay, transfer him to Brooklyn, to the VA hospital, which was a military hospital at the time, and the Navy surgeons will set the ankle, but the Brooklyn surgeons can consult. Well, so 7 weeks later, he arrives, and the ankle's already set. And so they don't know what to do, and we've got a surgeon here, so she'll understand this. They decided what they had to do was basically re-break the ankle and set it. And in doing so, it shattered. And my father ended up with 2 steel plates and 4 steel bolts till the day he died in his ankle. And it's kind of like Humpty Dumpty. You know, once it falls apart, it's hard to put all the pieces back in again. He left there, devastated. The Dodgers, 3 days after his surgery, released him from his contract. And this is a guy who believed his life was all about baseball. There was nothing else for him. He had no education. He had no training in the Navy. He was a baseball player. The Dodgers told him he'd never play again. He went back to Chester, Illinois, arrived in 1945, took a seat in a bar stool in a place called Bruno's and started drinking, and went from the town hero to the town drunk. And in 1949, 4 years of being just an absolute mess, the baseball scout, Frank Boudreaux, that scouted him originally in 1941, showed up at the bar, took him off the bar stool, sobered him up, got him back in shape, and signed him to a contract with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he reported to Greenville, Mississippi to continue his career with the Pirates. Now, I'm going to stop right there, because if I tell the rest of the story, my publisher will absolutely forbid me to speak again. So I can't tell you more. Here, let me tell you this. People always they ask me, say, is this a baseball story? And the answer to that is, baseball is its backdrop, baseball is its theme, but it's not a baseball story. It's a story just about life. You know, about people who are going for the dream, and if that dream is taken from them, or they hit an obstacle that keeps them from it, how they recover. People say, well, okay, is there a story about World War II? No, not really. World War II, again, is one of the backdrops, one of the theaters it plays on. People say, well, what's it about? And I think that Jim Morrison, who, the movie, the Rookie, some of you have seen that movie, he wrote the foreword to this book, and he called me, and he said, this book is about what a man does with a second chance. And he says, I understand that story. And so that's what the story's about. You know, it's been optioned 3 different times as a motion picture. The first time by Gerald Molen, the Academy Award-winning producer of Schindler's List. He ended up getting into a lawsuit with a younger partner and losing. The younger partner won the rights to the movie. I was tied up for 7 years, but he had no money and no power to make it. And so now we've created a production company. We're actually raising the money now. We're getting very, very close to being able to launch it and get this movie into production. So we're really excited about that. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Now, let me. The book itself is in paperback, and it's in hardcover, and it's also in audiobooks. And I don't think. Do you have books here? Is there books here? Okay. All right. So there are books here. I would love to sign one for you. I hope you'll read it. I think you'll enjoy the story. I hope you'll tell other people about it. It's my first book, and I've got 2 others out, but this one is just This book in 2012, I think it was, or it could be 2013, was the 7th best selling book in China. It just keeps, yeah. And I never got a dime, I should tell you that. I never got a dime. And the only reason I knew it was in China is I kept getting these alerts on Google about my book in China. And but if the book made a difference, it helps somebody, then I'm fine with that. So, are there any questions? Anything I can answer for you? Yes.
Yeah, great. I don't know if you remember this well anyway. I read the book in 2008. My wife bought the book for me. She'd read it. Said, "You've got to read this book. This is going to get you reading again." And I read it. I finished it after midnight, and I'm almost positive I sent you an email.
What's your name?
Earl Altschuler from San Diego. I'm almost positive.
I think I remember that. I'll look it up. I saved them all.
Yeah, and I couldn't get that book off of my mind after I read it. It was that good.
Thank you.
And when I got the email about today, I looked up my bookcase in my office, and there was the book. And I took it out again, and oh wow! But, yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
Baseball's kind of the backdrop. The war's the backdrop. But that story about your dad, and when you really found out about everything.
Yeah. Well, that's, and I should thank you for bringing it up. See, I grew up in a house where my father didn't like baseball. And he really kind of forbid me from playing baseball. And I didn't know why. I mean, I was a little kid, and I'm a typical kid, and I'm growing up, and I love the Cubs and love the Sox, and I'd come home and I'd see other kids playing catch with their dad in the yard. And I'd come to my dad and say, "Hey, let's play catch." And he'd say, "No, let's go to the American Legion and watch the drum and bugle corps practice." And I'd say, "What?" So he'd load me up in the car, we'd go to the drum and bugle corps practice, and we'd watch the drum corps walk, march around the parking lot. And, I found it kind of remotely interesting, but nothing that really excited me like playing baseball. I started playing Little League. My father wouldn't come. My father was the guy who would never miss anything. He was at everything, but wouldn't come to the baseball games. And he used to always say the same thing to me. He'd say, "Don't play baseball. It's a waste of time. It'll break your heart, and someday you'll have to quit. But play music, you can do it forever." Well, if you think a parent doesn't influence their kid, I went on to get a degree in music education, spent my life, most of my childhood marching in drum and bugle corps, competing Chicago Cavaliers, and having fun. Met my wife; she was in the Phantom Regiment drum and bugle corps from Rockford, Illinois, and it just really, really kind of changed my life. But my father would never tell me anything about baseball. He just hated it. Well, I'd go to the little town where he's from, Cessna, Illinois, run up and down the street, and somebody waved me into the bar. They'd say, "Hey, Eugene Moore's kid, come in here." And they'd set me up in the bar, and I remember they'd buy me a 7-Up with a cherry in it, and they'd tell me stories about my dad. And I'd just sit there and think, they got the wrong guy. They'd tell me what my father was the greatest baseball player to ever come out of Southern Illinois. He was this, he was that. And I'd run home to my dad and say, "Dad, they said you're the greatest baseball player ever come out of this town." He'd look at me and say, "Town has 700 people in it. How good do you think you have to be?" And I'd think, "Yeah, you're right. It wasn't good." Well, went into business with my dad after college. And we were in a room very similar to this with a group about this size, and he's giving a sales meeting. He's talking to a group of salespeople. And all of a sudden, he throws up his arms. He's 57 years old, and I was sitting right there. And he looked at me, and he put his hand on his chest. He said, "Take over." And he walked out of the room. Well, I was 29 years old. I wasn't about to be able to take over. He was incredibly charismatic. Everybody loved him. Most of the people in the audience that he was talking to was about his age. So I get up, and I stumble through it, and I try to speak like he would speak, but I couldn't. He captivated an audience. He was amazing. Walk out of the room, and I look around. He's not there. A salesman who came in late came in, and he says, "Hey, what happened to Gene?" And I said, "I don't know what you mean." He says, "Well, he's out in the parking lot, leaned over the car, holding his left arm." So I thought, well, that's weird. It never occurred to me he had a heart attack. He's 57 years old. All of a sudden, phone rings. My mother, and she's screaming and crying. She says, "Why'd you let your father drive home when he's having a heart attack?" I jump in the car. I drive to Riverside Hospital in Kankakee, where he was, and I go into the emergency room, and it's a typical Gene Moore setting. I walk in. I hear everybody's laughing, very similar to George Mitrovich. Everybody's gathered. And it just hit me. I think that's why I'm so attracted to George. No, seriously, my father was very, very similar. And so all these people are gathered around my dad, and he's telling jokes and telling stories, and he's convinced them that he's fine. So all of a sudden, doctor walks up to me and says, "Oh, Gary," says, "your dad, I think he pulled a muscle." He raised his arm, he said. And I said, "He pulled a muscle?" I said, "He was holding his arm in pain and leaning over." The doctor goes, "Oh, Gene, did you have pain in your left arm?" He said, "Oh, a little bit." He said, "Oh, well, we're going to get you an appointment." He says, "My roommate in college at St. Louis University is now one of the world's most renowned heart surgeons." He says, "We're going to get you in to see him next week." So next week happens. We walk in, and I'm going to keep now. The doctor in the room, I know she'll get a kick out of this. World's leading heart surgeon. Now keep in mind, this is 1983, so things have changed. We walk in, and they introduce us to the world's leading heart surgeon, and he's about this tall, and I know he weighed 350 pounds. I know he did. And he sat down, and in his desk is an ashtray that is just like this, covered. And he offers my father, the heart patient, a cigarette, which my father takes, and they sit there and start talking about his friend, the doctor, that he'd gone to college with. And they talk a little bit. So the world's leading heart surgeon takes my dad's blood pressure, takes his pulse, and he says, "I think you're okay." And so I'm sitting there, I'm a 29-year-old kid, and I said, "I don't think he's okay." He said, "Well," he says, "Where'd you get your medical license?" I said, "Well," I said, "he was holding his arm in pain." And he looks at my dad and says, "Did you have pain in your left arm?" He said, "Oh, a little bit." And he says, "Okay." He says, "Come back tomorrow." No, it's come back Monday. This was Thursday. And he says, "Bring some good walking shoes because we're going to put you on a treadmill and we're going to give you a test." Well, that night, for those of you from Chicago, remember George Diamond Steakhouse in South Wabash. That was really our family go-to place for celebration. We walk out of the hospital, and it was Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital there in kind of Little Italy. And my dad goes, "Let's go to George Diamond's and celebrate." I said, "Celebrate what?" He says that I'm fine. I said, "They didn't say you were fine." He said, "I'm fine. We're okay." So we went to George Diamond's, and I'm a mess. My father is also my idol, my best friend. I'm looking at him thinking, "What? I'm about to lose my father." So when we're sitting there, I start realizing if my father died, I knew nothing about his life, nothing. And so I said, "Tell me about your life." He says, "Well, it's not much to tell." And he would always say, "My life started when my kids were born." That's when my life started. And I said, "Yeah, but you had a life before them. We weren't born at the same time." And he'd say, "Well, I grew up in Southern Illinois." I said, "I know, but what? You were in the Navy." "Yeah, I was in the Navy." "What did you do in the Navy?" "I was a motor mechanics mate, 3rd class." I said, "What did you do?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I worked on motors." Well, my father couldn't change the oil. He couldn't do anything. My father didn't know how to jump start a car. And I said, "Well, how'd that work out for you?" I mean, you don't know. You don't know. Well, that's just what they do. They gave me. I said, "Why were you in North Africa? There's no ships sailing in North Africa." He said, "Well, that's where they put me." He said, "When you're in service, you don't ask questions. You just go where they tell you to go, and you do what they tell you to do." So I started pressing him, and my father never. I remember only 2 times in my life my father got angry at me, and both times was over the subject. We're sitting at the table, and finally he goes, what are you trying to do? What is it you want to know?" I said, "I have a little boy that's 4 years old who adores you. And if you would have died that day of this heart attack that I think you had, that you think you didn't have, I would have no story to tell him. I don't even know who you are." We sat there for the next 3 hours, and he told me the story that became this book. And I couldn't believe it. Then things start coming into perspective. When I was 12 years old, I'm running through the house, and I can't find clean socks. My mother's yelling at me, and she's chasing me with her hairbrush, which was her weapon of choice. And she said, "You're going to be late for school. You're late for school." I can't find socks. She said, "Well, your feet are big now. Borrow your socks from your dad." So I go to my dad's sock drawer, and I reach and I pull my dad's socks out. And in pulling out the socks, I pull out an old yellow envelope. And the envelope is to Gene Moore in Cessna, Illinois, which he hadn't lived there in years. And I can find it here. And it was from the Pittsburgh Pirates. So I'm thinking, what does my dad? My first thought was, he bought tickets to a game. He's going to take me to a game. But this was the letter. It's a handwritten letter from a very famous baseball executive named Ted McGrew. If you Google him, he's pretty big in the game at the time. And in the letter, it just says, "We're glad you finally decided to come play. We're going to give you the best chance to revive your career," and so on and so forth. So I'm looking at this letter at 12 years old, and I'm thinking, what is this? So my dad walked in, and he saw the letter. He says, "What'd you do? What are you doing with that?" And I said, "Well, I was getting socks, and I found it." And he pulled it from my hand, and he stood there, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I could see his eyes touching on each word. Got done, he folded it up and put it in his pocket. He says, don't you ever ask me about this again. And so I didn't. The Chicago Tribune, when they did the review of the book, did a glowing review of the book when it first came out, and the headline of it was Deathbed Confession Becomes Book. It wasn't Deathbed Confession. I didn't know my father was going to die less than 24 hours later. But he told me the story sitting in that restaurant. It started about 5 o'clock, and 5 o'clock the next day, he was dead. Died of a massive heart attack. I had a lot of trouble, and I'll just finish with this. I had a lot of trouble writing this book because I wrote it as a family story. I just wanted to give it to my kids so they'd know who their grandfather was. And my son, who's an actor, lives and works in Los Angeles, he'd been to several movies and TV shows. And he says, I can take this to my agent. You've got to do something with this. And when I was writing it, my mother was still alive. And I said to my mother, I want to write this book about Dad, but Dad didn't want to tell anybody the story. And when she took my hand, she goes, oh, you didn't know your dad very well, which I didn't, She said he hated to talk about himself, but he loved it when other people did. She says, go tell this story. So I hope my father's happy with it. I hope you enjoy it. And I want to tell you, it's been a pleasure being with you today. I'll stay as long as you want. Any questions you have, I'd love to sign a book for you. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my idol and hero, George.
Well, that was pretty spectacular. Thank you, Gary, so much, and thank you, Arlene, for coming. And I think it must run in the family because he mentioned their daughter, Tara Beth Leach, is the senior pastor at the First Church of the Nazarene in Pasadena. It's a very big church. And the Nazarenes have been very big in my family's life and Laverle's life. But I didn't know Tara Beth. And on April 15, which is the day that we celebrate Jackie Robinson's first game in baseball in 1947 with the Dodgers, that happened to be a Sunday. And on that Sunday, the pastor of our church asked if I would take some time in worship to talk about Jackie in the context of the Methodist Church, which was a very big factor in Jackie's life, as it was in Branch Ricky's life. And our guest preacher that day was a man named Mark Laverton, who's the president of Fuller Theological Seminary, which just happens to be the world's biggest. A very great preacher. And between the services, he understood I had a Pasadena connection. So he asked me, do you know the preacher at that church? I said I didn't. He said, well, she's really a great preacher. And I went online and listened to the sermon that she preached the Sunday before Election Day 2016. It was a phenomenal sermon. Nazarenes are conservative, but they're not fundamentalist. And I thought it was an enormously courageous sermon that she gave. So I connected, and that's how we connected, and it's just been wonderful. Now, he'll sign the book for you. I hope you will take a book home. We're selling it at $2 under the listed price because, hey, that's what we're all about here at the City Club. The Walmart of public forums or something like that. I don't really mean that. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Hello, Jim. Hello, Miss Vieto.